Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of the podcast. And yes, it is spelled with a CAS, an unofficial IB podcast made by IB students for IB students and other people alike. In today's episode, we have our TOK teacher,
And
Mr. Eamonn Dunne.
And English teacher.
And English
Mr.
teacher.
Eamonn Dunne. Mr. Eamonn Dunne, English teacher, TOK teacher, great guy, has a very loud voice, from Ireland too, that's the most important part. Is there anything else you'd like to add to your own repertoire here?
Yeah, the Irish thing is probably the most important part. Thank you. Yeah, you got it.
So, Mr. Eamonn, would you be able to give us a brief description of what TOK is exactly?
What TOK is, as a curriculum or a course, or as a way of. Well, I suppose the best way of putting it is it's an opportunity for students to be able to think about why they learn what they learn and what its consequences are for real life. So what I like about TOK is it thinks about why we have certain disciplines like mathematics or psychology or English, and tries to think about them as a real life consequence. In by which I would mean what are they good for? Why do we need to be doing that? It gives an opportunity for students to think outside the box a little bit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Can I ask the next question?
I mean, certainly TOK, from my experience from learning with your class, you seem to be very, into TOK. So how long have you been teaching TOK exactly?
Teaching TOK? This is my second year teaching the TOK course. But overall, I suppose, I like to think about it as it links very neatly with philosophy, although TOK teachers would probably say it's not just philosophy. It's not just philosophy, and we have to be careful of that. But in terms of philosophy, I've been reading philosophy since I was 14.
Would you say there's a really fine line between philosophy and TOK itself?
Well,
sometimes they become intermingled with one
I think they do, and I think it crosses over an awful lot. I mean, it crosses over into different areas. But I like to think about philosophy as a love of knowledge, a love of wisdom, thinking about why we need to know what we need to know and what that knowledge can bring us. And I think in that regard, TOK really does cross over nicely with philosophy, and I like that.
It does cross over. But what about this? What are the clearest distinctions from philosophy, though? Because philosophy in itself can still be about knowledge itself and how we operate around it. Why would TOK really be different from philosophy?
Sure, I suppose the practical side of things is probably
the practical side.
Yeah, which is probably the biggest kind of concern when it comes to philosophy. People have a general idea of philosophers thinking abstract thoughts, thinking about abstract ideas that have no real relevance to life. I like the way that TOK is not philosophy in the sense that it is really very interested. Philosophy is interested in real life situations. But when it comes to TOK, students are asked to talk about real life situations and then bring that to bear on their thinking, as opposed to the other way around, which sometimes happens with philosophy. Yeah.
Then what would you say is the end-all, be-all goal of TOK then? The biggest thing that the class wants to teach people?
So that's a really good question. So here's what I would say. I think when it comes to kind of thinking about education, the way we learn, I think that TOK is is really good at getting students to think about why they're in a classroom and how they learn and what they learn and what's the reason for learning, which crosses over all the different disciplines that they're in. I mean, if you think about stuff that we're doing in English classes, like George Monbiot, who talks about robots, right? And he talks about the way education system becomes robotic and people get conditioned to learn in a certain way. I think it's a really interesting argument that crosses into TOK nicely. Because TOK is supposed to make you think about how you learn, why you're learning what you're learning, and whether or not learning the way you're learning is the best way for you. So for instance, students sometimes they'll react to TOK and they'll think, okay, maybe they want to learn certain things, they want to have a certain program, they want to know exactly where they're going with this project. And some students react to this because they need that. Because they're conditioned to do that. They're conditioned to think in that way. I need the curriculum to be based on this. I need to have my learning outcome. It needs to be standard standardized in a certain way, and they're comfortable with learning that way. But I don't think that's always necessarily the case in real life, the way things happen in real life, that's the best learning trajectory. You know, Mumbai talks about this. He talks about robots in the 21st century. And he talks about the way education systems tend to roboticize, if you like.
Romanticize.
You know, inverted commas. Roboticize students. It makes them think in a certain way. But it's all the same way for every student.
Right.
Now, some students, what they'll do is they'll react against thinking outside of that regime, outside of that structure. And it causes them problems when a TOK class hits them. They're like, yeah, but we need to have this. We need this to be standard this way. I need to know where I'm going with this. I need linear thought. I like the way TOK upsets that. So it's giving you an opportunity to say, okay, I'm an independent learner. I can go and research a topic that I want to research. I can think outside the box, to use the cliche. And that's what's really fascinating about that subject. You can, in TOK, research practically anything you want to research. All you got to do is bring it back to your real life situation and say, this is important for me, and here's why it's important. So, if you think about the IO and TOK, it's giving you an opportunity to talk about what you want to talk about, the way you want to talk about it, which is fascinating. I really like that.
See.
Well, TOK, from your description and from my experience in your class, seems to, have like high applicability in like just about like any field. Like TOK, you have all these like different ways of knowing, learning outcomes, ways of knowledge on different subjects like math and such. But personally, from my own experience, and I'm sure I've also read some experience of students online, there seems to be some sort of a high divide between some TOK students, where from what I've heard from some of my peers, they enjoy TOK because it's a more of a relaxing break from the rigorous
That's true.
academic economy, whereas some other people, which of course including me, I just personally prefer to focus on my academics instead. Now, what would you say would sometimes like cause students to like kind of divide up into these two different like mindsets?
That's a really good question.
For me specifically, I actually do enjoy TOK
Yeah.
at certain times.
Sure.
Mostly only when I'm understanding like what I'm doing. Like sometimes TOK can get really abstract and confusing, and usually that just ends up hurting my head and my nap time in class.
Sure,
it just becomes my nap time. Thank you for the pillow, by the way.
You're fine. You're welcome. No, I mean that's understandable. Again, I mean, when it comes to academics, right, we're very attuned to thinking about school as a means to an end.
A means to an end.
And that's fine. It's a utilitarian kind of understanding of it. A pragmatic understanding of it, rather. Pragmatic understanding of schooling is, look, I go to school, I learn a certain subject that's going to get me into university that I want to go to. I get the points that I need to go to university, and I do the course that I need to do in order to earn money and have a good life.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with that is, I'm not saying that it's a problem for everybody, but the problem can be that that's a very, how should I put it? It's a very narrow way of thinking about why you're being educated. I mean, if it's a means to an end where you think, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to get a good job, I'm going to have a good life and all. A good job doesn't necessarily mean a good life, to be honest. Happiness doesn't necessarily mean the narrative that you associate with success. Okay, so we're like we're fed stories when we're younger about what a good life looks like, and this is not from only from teachers or parents or from anybody around. We understand that we need money to survive and we need a good education to get on in life, and it's good to be educated, and that's what we're here for, and that's great. But if we look at it entirely in a utilitarian, in a pragmatic manner rather, if we look at it entirely in one way, as financial success, well then education for me gets narrowed down to something that's not necessarily what I would understand as education.
Pursuit of knowledge, something like that.
Education does mean confusion sometimes.
Very much.
Being confused is a good thing, because it teaches us that when we're confused in real life outside of school, which will happen,
yes,
to be comfortable with confusion is a good thing. The more you're exposed to it in school, I think the better chances you have outside of school to be able to deal with that in a constructive way. Now, I think TOK is an interesting subject for this because it asks you to think for yourself independently. It gives you that independence. Now, students sometimes are not comfortable. Sometimes, not all students. Some students find this an uncomfortable experience. The best thing to do in a TOK class, at least in my experience, is to allow that to happen and then to have a constructive conversation about the class. Why am I confused about this? What do I need from this? Is TOK, okay, some students they say, okay, I'm comfortable in TOK class. I don't see its relevance, maybe. I would argue against that concept. I would think that the relevance of TOK is a real life relevance. And I think it really does, it pushes you in certain directions to think for yourself that are going to stand to you after school. When you think back on school and you think about what did I learn in this class or what did I learn in that class, TOK seems to me to be able to bring that together. Why did I need to learn that? Why? What did that do for me? Is it just a utilitarian or a pragmatic understanding of the world? No. It's an understanding of the world that helps me deal with situations where I'm not going to have somebody to stand over me and tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. That's the best part of it.
True. But But how often is that goal actually achieved, though, in a TOK class? Like, it's such an abstract concept, such an abstract way of learning, different from like all the rudimentary basics that we've built up before.
Sure.
How often do you think like this goal of TOK is actually achieved?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, there's a poster on my wall behind you, and it says, "From Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living." It's there.
Where is it?
Yes.
Oh, there it is.
Okay. Now, for me, what that means is, it means that goal, that abstraction, is the most important point.
The abstraction.
The thinking abstractly, thinking about what am I doing this for, why am I doing this, forgetting about for a moment, giving yourself an opportunity for a moment in a school day, to stay, okay, mathematics is fine, I need this to get on here, and yes, it does, it is important. Or history is an important class, I need to understand about the history of the world. Or psychology is an important class, because I need to understand about how I think. Or English is an important class, because I need to think about how other people react in the world, right? But you're giving yourself a moment to reflect on why that's important, all of it. How that crosses over into different facets of your own life. Why it's important for me to think this way. That's the important point. There's a reason why TOK is only, every few days. It's not, you don't get it every day.
It's not an everyday class.
No, it's not an everyday class. It's an opportunity for you to take time to reflect. Now, some people would say the same thing for mindfulness, for instance. If we have a mindfulness class in here, we could sit down and think about things, and reflect a bit. What TOK tries to do is it tries to say, look, you're in a school, you're in an educational environment. Think about it. What is it going to do for you in your life? And that's a phenomenal thing for a school to offer. For a school to offer its students an opportunity to sit back and say, listen, we're not just schooling every day. We're not just learning to get to a certain point in our lives, like to get to university every day. We're not just thinking about, we've got to think about what an examined life means. That's what Socrates said, So the funny thing about Socrates, all I know is that I know nothing is the famous is the quotation, all right?
Is he the guy that said, like, I think, therefore I am, or...
That's Descartes. But what Descartes was trying to do was he called Cartesian doubt. He's trying to break everything down to a fundamental point. He said, listen, the only thing I know in the world is, I think. That's the only thing I can know. Mm-hmm. And then he builds everything up from it. Like, of course, Descartes is a mathematician, so he's very logical understanding of the world. But different philosophers, different takes on it. I like the Socratic understanding of it. But what I don't like about Socrates when he's in dialogue with people, Socrates always knows more than everybody in the room. And even though he says I know nothing, he knows that he knows more than anybody else in the room. So it's a kind of a con. I think, thinking like that in here, in a class, if people are open and honest about TOK, first of all, and this is a great conversation to be having about TOK, because what you're saying is, what's it? Why do we need TOK?
Why do we need TOK?
We don't. The reality is you don't need it, and that's what's great about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because you get to the stage where you say, listen, you know what? I need mathematics to get through to the university, and I know it's part of the core, and you need it for that. But there's a reason why it's a pass-fail class. as well.
I see.
There's a reason why we're not giving you A, B, C.
There's
we're
a reason
asking
why
you
it's
to
not
think.
like a TOK exam at the end of the year.
Exactly, yeah. The way you're being asked to do is just to kind of sit back and say, listen, you know what?
TOK exam.
Yeah, but reflect, you know. Think about why all of this is necessary. It's a fascinating thing for a school to be able to offer somebody a moment out of their everyday schedule to say, listen, you know what? We got to ask why we're doing this. And we got to ask, you know, I mean, Well gave a presentation there. We're looking at the IO and we're thinking about that. And her presentation was to do with happiness.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing, you know, again, the Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living, you know. Epicureans would say life should be all about pleasure and fun. You know, Stoics would say it shouldn't. It should be all about learning and working. But these are different ways of looking at the same thing. And everybody has a different way of looking at life. But the thing about it is to see, for me at least, to have as many opinions as you can gathered up together. To say that if anything ever happens in my life, I can go back to that and say, I know some people think this and some people think that. Which is best for me? And that's really good. You know, so for students, you know, if a student asks me, okay, I'm not really having fun in TOK class, or I'm not enjoying it, what I would say to them is, you know, listen, you're given an opportunity here. The opportunity is you to go and independently think about this. Independently learn. Think about something that interests you. Bring it to TOK class, and then discuss it and think about it. And is it worthwhile for you? I mean, for me at least, the most important questions in school don't generally get addressed in subject classes. TOK is a class that you can ask important questions. You can open up a safe space where people have an opportunity to think about what makes them happy, what success means, what happiness means in your life. You know, these are important questions, and this is a space to do it. So I really like that. Yeah.
So would you say, in a sense, TOK kind of like, you know, you did say that TOK is like a required thing for a student to have a successful life, but would you say TOK kind of has like, or like enhance a student's sense of purpose in their life in sort of way?
You know, that's a really good question, because when it comes to the idea of purpose, I mean, really, and I'm not being, you know, facetious about this, or not, what I'm trying to say is like, when it comes to like purpose, right? The question is to ask yourself, I mean, you ask yourself, to have purpose in life, what does it mean? What purpose do I need to have in life? And what is your purpose in life? What is going to make you feel that you're fulfilled as an individual? What will make you feel like you're successful as an individual? What's going to make you feel like you're happy as an individual? These are questions that you're asking in class. Does it give you the answer? The answer to that is no. Is there a fundamental answer to that? No. Is it okay to be confused about that? Yes. Is there a place that you can't be confused about that? Yes. It's in the OK class. And that's where you should be talking about. Yeah, so that's my answer to that. And that's not avoiding the point. It's trying to answer it.
However, what if we want to try and avoid some of that confusion? Like some practical advice for understanding TOK better. Do you have any advice for, say, you know, doing your TOK presentation more efficiently and not like banging your head on the wall when you have to get up there? Yeah. I think that the best answer to that one is to say, find something that interests you, that you're passionate about. And it doesn't necessarily mean, okay, I'm really interested in mathematics, I'm really interested in English literature, I'm really interested. What it means is something really that interests you. And that's a really good question for a lot of students. What really interests me? And it's not an academic answer. You know, and that's what's fascinating about this whole thing. It's not an academic. The whole point of the real life situation, in as I see it, in the oral, is to say, listen, there's something that affects me in real life, right? I've been thinking about this, and I really want to talk about it, and I really want to research it and think about it in an interesting way. That's what the IO is giving you an opportunity to do, to think about something that affects you in real life, to explore it in an interesting way, through different areas of knowledge, through different ways of knowing, emotion, intuition, through human sciences, through psychology if you want it. But really to come up with something that is fundamentally an issue for you. You've seen something, you think this is important, you really want to explore, and you want to talk to people about it. That's what an interesting thing would do for me. Would you say it's kind of limiting though, the things you can talk about in TOK? Like, for example, you have to base your knowledge question off of a second order claim, and sometimes that limits the specificity of the topic that you want to delve into, and like you have to frame it more about the knowledge of the topic rather than like parts of that topic itself.
Well, I would think that's there to help you more than anything else, and the reason being is that, you know, you come up with a question, and it's come up already, for a knowledge question, and one of the questions is there a God? Well, that's not really a knowledge question, you know. No, because we have no knowledge of that, you know. But what it's trying to do, the second order question, it's trying to reframe that question into a point where you can say, well,
we can delve
you know,
into it more.
Well, here's the point. What is the point of studying a certain religion? Or are certain religions more effective in teaching about spiritual life than other religions? That's a better question. It's narrowing down the question so you can actually have a go at it. Because is there a God doesn't have an answer, like, you know. Well, I'm sorry, hold on, let's retract. We're in a Catholic space.
You're being recorded too.
Yeah, I know. What I'm trying to say is that we don't have any fundamental knowledge of it. Faith and knowledge, now that's a question.
Faith and knowledge.
Faith is a question. Does faith happen in real life situations? Absolutely. Like Kierkegaard, Soren Kierkegaard, Danish philosopher. You have to take a leap of faith. What he means by that is that there's no knowledge.
True.
You got to leap as if you're leaping over an abyss. Nietzsche says the same thing, right? Now of course we're going back into philosophy here. But the point is that the second order question is there to frame it in a way that you can actually have a go at creating an argument for yourself that's going to be helpful for you to understand better this concept maybe of faith and knowledge, and what are the differences, and why should we be concerned about it. You should be concerned about it, because you will be concerned about it in your daily life. Even if you say, okay, I'm agnostic, or I'm an atheist, these are still existential, you know, questions, faith questions. I mean, agnostic, you know, an atheist, you know, there is no God. Well, that's a faith. You know, I mean, that's the paradox of it. So you should be asking yourself these questions, yeah.
Do you think there should be more freedom to a TOK presentation, though? Because to me, at least, I know this is personal preference, but I really dislike how there's a certain set structure that you have to follow to get a good score in a TOK presentation.
Yeah.
I'd rather have things be more fluid for a topic that, you know, you're more interested in and want to discuss like that.
That's a very tricky situation, and the reason being is that I agree with you. I don't particularly like the idea that I have to do it in such a structured way. But at the same time, I understand that there are students who, first of all, need structure in order to do well. To be clear, I mean. To have a clear, concise conversation or argument. But also as well, the idea of a structure there is to stop students really going waffling. Because you will get students who think that TOK is not important. And they'll say, okay, and they'll take the course too lightly. And they'll say, well, I don't really care. There's no real structure to it, or whatever. There is a structure to it, and that structure is there to make it a course. But it's not there to refine you. It's there to allow you to explore in a concentrated way, in a pointed way, your issue. So it's trying to steer you into researching your issue. For instance, I come in here and say, okay, I could talk about some concept, whatever, we're talking about God, right? So I could talk about the concept of God, but I could do it in a way that really means that I haven't even bothered to think about it properly.
Right.
I mean, it's trying to get you to think.
True.
Now, Martin Heidegger, another philosopher, talks about, in a very famous book called What is Thinking, says that the hardest thing to do now in life is to think. He said this in the 1950s, way before there was internet. And he basically said, and he predicted it, that technology was going to become such a force in our life that it will stop us from thinking, from having the space to think, or doing things, having that moment away from everything, in order, like mindfulness is probably the best way of putting this, is the switching off from the world and thinking. Now, with the internet and with my kids and with everybody else's kids, and everybody's worried about it nowadays, is that do we spend too much time on the screen? Do we spend too much time being immersed in advertisements? Think about this new phenomenon. It's not a new phenomenon, but they're calling it a new phenomenon, surveillance capitalism, where when you're on your internet and you're on Google or YouTube, now, right? I'm in the gym in the morning and YouTube comes on and I'm trying to play a song on YouTube. Every 5 minutes there's a new ad coming or there's a new song that I've never heard before, and I'm on the treadmill, so I can't get off the treadmill to go and turn this off, right? But that's what I'm trying to, that's what I think Heidegger was saying. Heidegger was saying there will come a point where you're so immersed in this capitalist or in this technological world where you cannot actually think for yourself anymore. Now, you could argue that I should turn off the YouTube and run with no music on, which is a better point. But I am immersed in this technological world and I can't get away from it. Fishing was my other way of doing it, but I don't really have an opportunity to do that much these days. Yeah.
I'd argue though, because we studied this in psychology class, that technology actually does promote like greater thinking. With the introduction of in the internet and technology, we don't use up as much brain space learning and like memorizing knowledge. We more so like memorize how to access that knowledge, and so that frees up a lot of like thinking space and brain energy to perform other capabilities. And it's said that it might also promote more thinking and more creativity, things like that. You can argue it that way.
That's a very good point, and I would maybe think about paradigm shifts that we talked about at the start of the year. Thomas Kuhn, he talked about this idea of scientific revolutions. And he talks about the idea that people's minds literally change over time. They literally change. Technology has literally changed their way of thinking. This is true. And I agree with you. So there is a counter argument to that. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Now, certainly, going back to the bit about the structures within TOK. Now, personally, I could categorize structures in kind of like, a two-type thing where the one kind of structures is where students are able to build upon that structures and use that structure as sort of a base for their own creation, or that structure acts kind of like as a mild restrictions in order to prevent the student from going too far or going too far off topic or creating some sort of circular argument within their presentation or their workings or whatever. So would you say that the structures in TOK is more towards a core where students build upon on, or a structure that aids in preventing the students from, creating something that is too wide or too convoluted for the people to understand, or is it more a mix of both things?
I would say that you're probably right in the last bit there. I think it's more of a mix of things. But then again, it depends on the student. Some students, again, they need structures in order to do something. They need to feel that they've done something in a very structured and ordered way in order to feel happy about it. Some students would not be comfortable with, maybe you might call it creativity, or you might call it, that's a negative implication for the student. I don't mean that as a negative implication. But some students feel better if they're given more freedom to do things than other students. And I think what happens in the class when we have TOK and we have the structures for it, this is the argument or the conversation we're having now. I mean, do we need these structures? We do need the structures. We do need it in order to be able to get everybody on board. Like, you need to have some kind of base. But that's not to say that they should be restrictive structures. But when it comes to doing your I.O., of course, everybody knows that you'll need your introduction, that you'll need to be clear and concise. You need your argument, you need your counter-argument, you need your conclusion. These are important. But they are only restrictive, I think, if you think of them in that way. If you really think about, okay, how can I be creative with the structure? Well, then you're giving yourself an angle for creativity, really. Yeah.
You got anything else you want to ask, Shin?
No, I mean, certainly that's quite an interesting conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on the topic of you saying how some students prefer structure, like personally for me, as I enjoy a lot of mathematics, finance, and economics, I kind of and have already like mapped out different parts of my life and sort of like a structure generations, like different life goals that I want to reach. Whereas some people are more going with what the water flows. So would where the water flows, like it's like how salmons they I don't know, but I don't know, but you get the idea. So I guess the main thing that I kind of want to know is that, are you able to maybe like distinguish between the different kind of person, or are you able to like notice like a clear difference in like presentation style or the work styles between people who are more structure focused and people who are more of a creative and branching out into different flow focuses?
If I can play off your metaphor a little bit, you reminded me. Just remember Bruce Lee. I think everybody knows Bruce Lee.
Bruce Lee,
Bruce Lee, the martial artist.
Mm-hmm.
His argument is that people should be like water, and what he means by that is that they should be able to change with what's needed. Am I able to see it? Yeah, I think I can see students who like creativity. Of course, everybody can see that. There are students who really, really like to be creative and to play with structures. My advice to somebody who's going into an IO and saying, okay, I'm going to play around with the structure. My advice is to go and do the structure first, right? And then play with it, and then know. Like the best students who do the TOK presentations are the ones who seem like they know their stuff inside out. And you can see that as an examiner and as a teacher. You can see a student who's creative, but hasn't worked. Or a student who's creative and has worked. I mean, I think as a student, you guys know the difference as well. You can see somebody who stands up there and say, okay, and you know that this person has taken a week and a half of practice in order to make this presentation interesting. It's like a stand-up comedian. Stand-up comedians, they look like they're just making it up on the spot. Mm-hmm. But it's a very, very different story when they're actually sitting down to write. I mean, I learned this from Mr. Dave Wade last year. Oh. Dave Wade was doing a stand-up comic. He did stand-up comedy downtown in Bangkok. And a lot of other teachers went down. Mr. Garrett went down as well. And these guys got up on stage and they were like, and they were like, oh my God. When they got up on stage, they realized this is not as easy as it looks. That's presentation, And that's, some students, they say grace under pressure, but that's a learned thing.
Grace under pressure.
Grace under pressure. You got to learn that stuff.
I mean, certainly on that aspect kind of relates to how right now we do have like notes for our podcast, and even, we kind of plan to go quote freestyle. It's even though we say, I'm pretty good at improvisation or coming out with topics, but in reality, trying to connect those like freestyle topics that you have in your head into an existing conversation is actually harder than you might think it is.
I feel like you're throwing shade at me right now.
I'm not throwing shade at you. No, I know. You're doing a good job. Okay. I think we both are doing a fine job.
Yeah, it is. It's a difficult thing to do. Yeah, to improvise under pressure. Yes.
Yeah.
Improvise under pressure. I mean, when it comes to a podcast, it's a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a conversation. I enjoy conversation.
I'm not feeling too stressed right now.
I mean,
I have a bio exam next block. I'm fine. I'm fine.
Your like stress levels also depends on the person you're like doing a podcast with. I mean, obviously, you and I are best friends. Mr. Eamonn's a great, fun-loving teacher, great TOK teacher.
Yeah, cheers.
I mean, certainly that's kind of something.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if we were like doing interview with like an official head of IB diploma coordinator, we are obviously going to be probably going to way more like formal style questions and trying to not ask questions that he might think maybe these kids are asking me information to use them against me in court or something.
I'll bring my Bible to the conversation.
You might have more structured answers. That's the point, isn't it?
We're getting kind of off topic here.
But yeah, I mean, it is kind of a freestyle thing.
It's been enough. Yeah, it's been enough time for this TOK centric podcast. So, you want to end it? I can bring up my sound effects.
No, please don't. I mean, that seems like a good place to end. I mean, we have some insightful conversation from Mr. Eamonn about TOK and many things.
Help me.
And many things. About these things, and I feel like it's been a fine episode so far until this happened.
Mr. Eamonn, press one of these. Press the one you like most. The siren, of course. Sure. Anyways, yeah, this should signal the end of it. So, I'm gonna stop recording before I embarrass us anymore.
That's gonna be it for today's episode. We hope you guys have enjoyed, and if you do, please share this with other people. Or don't, because we're just doing this for a cast project. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to add that part. All right.